Like, dang, talk about a dramatic ending. Hello friends, my name is Lauren and welcome back to my channel. So over the last 1 or 2 months, I have made it a real priority to put some effort into rereading the School for Good and Evil series because the 6th and final book, One True King, was coming out. And not only has the last book come out, I've read it, I've reread the series, and I thought, you know, why not share some of my thoughts? Last year I reread all of the books because the 5th book was coming out, and since rereading them this year, a lot of my opinions have actually changed on the series. So I wanted to do an updated, overall series review with my updated thoughts this time and now include the 6th book. I had a really fun time reading this series. I would really recommend it and I'm excited to share all of my thoughts with you guys today. The way this video is going to work, it will be a mix of spoilers and non-spoilers. Basically, I'm going to go through each of the 6 books and I'm going to link the timestamps down below in the description, but basically once I start talking about one book, it's going to be all the spoiler-free stuff, but then I will give a clear warning before I go into the spoilers for that specific book. If you haven't yet to read the series, or if you've only read the first 3 books and you want to know how the next 3 books are, just skip to that part in the video that I linked down below. It will be spoiler free for a certain period of time before I jump into spoilers, so that way you're able to hear all of my thoughts on the book without getting spoilers if you don't want to be spoiled. That was a mouthful, I hope that makes sense. Anyways, before I jump into what this series is about, one thing I want to mention is the rankings of which book was my favorite. And so even though there are 6 books, 2 of the books I've given tie ratings. So in first place we have book 3 and 6, which is The Last Ever After and One True King. Those books take the lead with number 1. Then in second place we have book 1, which is just The School for Good and Evil. I really liked the beginning. In third place we have book 4 and 5, which is The Quest for Glory and A Crystal of Time. And in my 4th favorite spot is the second book, A World Without Princes. So I will be referencing that tier list again once I jump into more about what the books are about, but that's just my overall favorites and how much I enjoyed each of the books in a ranking scale. Anywho though, let's jump into what The School for Good and Evil is really about and start talking a little bit about the first book. So, The School for Good and Evil. This is the first book in the 6-book-long trilogy. Do I know how books work? This is the first book in the 6-book-long series, and it was actually my third favorite, second favorite book, if you want to call it that. I really enjoyed it. Basically, this book follows Sophie and Agatha. You can see them on the front covers here. Agatha, she lives in a graveyard alone with her mother and a black cat. She is not very friendly with people. She has no friends. She's genuinely just grumpy all the time, and people just call her a witch because that's what they believe she is. This is Sophie. She wears pink and does good deeds and tries to be nice to everyone. And as different as they may seem, they somehow have become friends. They live in this town where they're surrounded by forests, so no one can really leave, but that doesn't really seem to matter all that much. Anywho though, every 4 years in this town, 2 kids are taken, one seemingly good and one seemingly evil, and they're taken by the schoolmaster to go to the School for Good and Evil. And none of the kids are ever said to return once they get taken. At the School for Good and Evil, students are either placed in good or in evil in hopes to have a fairy tale written about them. Obviously the people in the School for Good learn about becoming the hero and how to save the day, and the evil side of the school learns how to become the villain and win their stories. And so, some way, somehow, they end up getting roped up into all the School for Good and Evil stuff, and while many people think that Sophie would be a perfect fit for the School for Good and Agatha a perfect fit for the School for Evil, who really knows what might happen? And as you can probably guess, in this book and all the rest, we follow Sophie and Agatha and their fairy tale story. Anyways, I really liked this book a lot. Last year, I actually gave this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars, which is not really that great, but upon rereading it this year, I actually increased my rating by quite a lot by giving it 4 out of 5 stars. This year, I really enjoyed this book. I think I just fell in love a little bit more with the story. I loved the friendship of Sophie and Agatha, and I love how the world is set up. I think the author does a great job at making everything really distinct as to which side is which, the morals and values of all the characters, especially these 2 main characters. And I think their path along the story is really interesting, especially how both of them grow. Whether they grow positively or negatively, you can really see how they're constantly changing throughout the story, learning new things, and I just really enjoyed it. This book was actually my 3rd favorite, technically in 2nd place because I liked the 3rd and 6th book more, but that's still a really good spot. I think the ending and cliffhanger of this book was really engaging and really made you want to read on with the next books in the series, and I really just enjoyed my time rereading this book. I do think my experience was hindered a little bit because I did kind of remember the events that was happening. However, that is kind of with all stories, but regardless, 4 to 5 stars is definitely a pretty awesome rating. If you have any questions for me about this book, feel free to leave me a comment down below, but I will briefly now be just going into a couple spoilers for this book, so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't keep on watching. Instead, if you want to hear my non-spoiler spoiler thoughts for the second book, click this time on the screen now. So now I'm gonna jump into the spoilers. So first off, Agatha. Agatha is one of my favorite characters throughout the story. Yes, she is one of the main characters, but her character development throughout the series is fantastic, especially in this book. She goes from thinking herself super ugly and not worthy of love to then learning to love herself over the course of the book. Because just because she doesn't dress like all the princesses and doesn't feel like she is a princess herself, she learns that it's not really what people see you as, it's how you see yourself. And as cringy as that sounds, it's a nice message. Last year when I gave this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars, one of the biggest reasons for that was because I found the stereotypes about girls put in this book quite a lot. I did not like it. However, upon rereading it, I can now kind of get the idea behind why they were all there. It was so that Agatha could learn to love herself the way she is rather than conforming to all of these stereotypes as well for Sophie to then step out of all these things she's always known. Sophie's character growth was quite interesting as she turns into this like crazy witch throughout the story. I loved seeing how we kind of learned the stuff in the classroom and then to see it play out in the tale of Sophie and Agatha. I really liked it. And the last thing I want to say about this book is the ending. Even though if the second book wasn't out, I would be screaming at the ending knowing I can't pick up the second book. I loved the fact that it's kind of really sudden but also makes a whole lot of sense. These two friends that have fought so hard to finally just be friends after all odds, they finally are. They give up this magical world just to be together, leaving Tedros behind, and I was like, dang, that's deep. But overall, I did really like this book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, really liked it, and I honestly would really recommend it, as well as all the other books in the series. But we are now going to move on to the second book. So now I'm going to be talking about The School for Good and Evil, A World Without Princes, the second book in this series. I can't really talk about what this book is about in the non-spoiler section because that's kind of spoilers for how the last book ends, but this book was technically my least favorite book in the series, but I still did enjoy my time reading it, as I did give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I just didn't find it matched up to the levels of all the other books. However, I did enjoy my time reading it. I think we got a lot of cool plot progression, as well as some great introductions to things that happen later on in the series. Last year, I started off by giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars, but then later changed my rating to a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So my opinions on this book haven't really changed all that much from last year to this year. I still love how we follow Sophie and Agatha. I love how we see the conflicts in their friendships, how they try to make up, the differences of them, but how they try to always work together. I just really liked this story, and especially when they're forced to trust each other due to circumstances, I think it really tests their friendship and all they really do for each other. This book also deals with themes of like jealousy and like not believing in yourself, so I definitely think by the end of the story, you can really see the impacts of that, and I just really liked how this book dealt with all those different things. However, the main theme of this book is, as you might be able to guess, the story itself is called A World Without Princes. Theme in the first book was good versus evil. The theme in this book is girls and boys. One thing I will say is that last year for the first book, I didn't really like the book because of all the stereotypes about girls in it. And in this book last year, I didn't like about all the stereotypes about boys. And while I don't think there was as many stereotypes about boys that I thought problematic last year, I think this book does go a little bit overboard with it. I'm not sure exactly how I would feel if I was a guy reading this book because there are quite a number of things that, you know, aren't that great, which I'll talk about in the spoiler section. But just for that reason, I didn't give it like a 4 star, as I still found it like on the verge of being problematic. But that being said, I still did enjoy this book. I liked the ending a lot. I think it really leads nicely into the third book, and actually the ending was my favorite part in this book. I think we see so much development from especially Tedros, the main male character, or at least he starts to open up a bit to the readers, and I just really liked that. So while this book may be my least favorite technically in the series, I still enjoyed my time reading it, and I definitely think it's worth reading, if not only to just continue on to the third book in the series. I'm now just gonna jump into a couple spoilers that I want to mention, so if you don't want to be spoiled, click to this time in the video to move on to the next book. So, alright, so we start off the book with the village trying to get rid of Sophie and Agatha. They end up out of the village and are kind of like outcasts in the woods now because of how they kind of made a mess of everything for all of the princes and guys in this world. We also get introduced to Evelyn Sater, who is essentially the villain in this story. Or not essentially is. She is the villain in this story. And while I did not like Evelyn Sater as a person, I found her character quite interesting and very cool how she uses her butterflies to spy on everyone, and I found that just overall really cool to read about. One thing I want to jump on though is the fact about the boys. I found it's really something. So the fact that they're all acting like complete animals with no teacher supervision, I found I was like, alright, whatever. But then the fact that the prince offers offers them up as slaves to the girls. I was like, that sounds like it's going a little far, you know? So I didn't really like that element of this book, but I did like the fact that Sophie and Agatha's friendship was really tested, and I especially liked when Agatha thought Sophie was turning into a witch and was gonna go kiss Tedros to fix their fairy tale, but then Sophie like was hidden away and intervened in that, and then that kind of tested their friendship, how Sophie felt by being evil and how she had to come to terms with what she did, even though she thinks it was good. However, my favorite part especially though was when Sophie, acting as Philip, started to get closer to Tedros, and Tedros for the first time had a real like best friend, and especially when they go into the woods together, when those bonds are really tested and everything kind of comes out at the end. That was really exciting to read about, because we then learned that Tedros and Agatha loved each other all along, or at least we're getting on that path anyways, and the fact that Sophie was just doomed to end up alone until the schoolmaster came on by, killed Evelyn, and was like, Sophie, you're my true love, and since no one else loved Sophie, she went with him. Like, dang, talk about a dramatic ending. I did really like this ending in this book, and I think those are all the major things I want to talk about. I liked it. I thought the ending was my favorite. It took a while to get there, but I did enjoy it, and I just wish it was a little bit less, you know, stereotype heavy, like bad stuff for the boys. Other than that, I liked this book. Next, we're going to be talking about book 3 of The School for Good and Evil, The Last Ever After. This is tied as my favorite book in the series with the 6th book. I really enjoyed it. Last year when I read this book, I believe I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, if I'm not mistaken, and this year I actually gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It wasn't quite at the 5-star level because I wouldn't declare it one of my all-time favorites, but it was pretty close. Again, obviously I can't really talk about what this book is about, but again, we follow Sophie and Agatha as a school for good and evil. So the theme in this book is old versus new, and the story really reiterated that theme many times over. Whether it's like older people making fun of the younger people, how they don't know what they're doing, or vice versa. Especially how the older antagonists in the story make a comeback. Can I say that? Maybe. But especially how the old comes into the new and makes a really big difference in this world. In this story, we still on that character development with Sophie to becoming who she's meant to be, and Agatha really also questioning who she is meant to be as well. Like I said, the theme of new and old is really in their minds, so they're seeing where they want to be in the future, who they are, and still really figuring everything out. The world is in chaos, they have to fix it. Tedros and the School for Good and Evil is in the middle of all of it, and that's all I can really say without spoiling it, because now we're getting a little bit deeper into the series. But this book was tied with my favorite. I really liked it. It is pretty big. I think it's like 650 pages, but I will say I enjoyed myself throughout the entirety of this story. Sometimes, of course, yes, I wish it was a little bit faster and I got to see more things happen, especially towards the last bit of the book. So much goes on, the ending was great, and I was just really engaged a lot throughout this story. I will now be jumping into just a couple spoilers, so if you don't want to be spoiled for this book and want to hear my non-spoiler thoughts for the next book, click the timestamp down here. So the main thing I want to say for this is the fact that Agatha and Tedros are kind of questioning their happy ending together, because they were sent back home to Agatha's home where she was going to be completely fine with her prince. They found out that they can't just survive by themselves, they need their best friend. So they end up getting back into this fantasy world, and I really liked that because it shows that you need more than just like one relationship in your life to be happy, and I really liked that. They both really wanted Sophie. However, Sophie had finally found true love, something she was yearning for her whole life, and she wasn't necessarily ready to give it up until Agatha gave up her prince. I found the fact that Agatha gave up her prince to give Sophie a chance was really interesting, because not only did Sophie want a happy ending with Tedros, just so she could have that fairy tale love she's always dreamed of, but it also shows how insecure Agatha was in her position. And I really think that shows the character growth that happens throughout the story, where she knows she deserves what she's getting, she deserves the love, and she deserves whatever title comes with it. I love the scene with Agatha and Hort when they're looking into the wish fish and Agatha sees herself with Tedros in the future at Hort and Sophie's wedding. I loved that scene. It's one of my favorites throughout the whole entirety of this series, and one that made a lasting impact on me. I also really love Hort and the Coven. We see them a lot in this book, and I really just enjoyed their interactions and how they enhanced the story. Especially towards the end though, I really like how Sophie made that flip. Even though she was 100% dedicated to evil, she recognized the good that she was doing, even if it meant giving up her true love. Especially when she seemed so happy at the end being dean of the school. I loved her progression as a character, all the characters really, and I think it's a great ending to this like original trilogy in the series. And now I'm gonna jump into book 4, The School for Good and Evil, Quests for Glory. This is the first book in the Camelot Years trilogy, technically like the continuation onto the original trilogy, so book 4. This book last year, I believe I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars to, and this year I actually gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars too. I enjoyed my time reading it more, and I really liked the progression of the main fairy tale being told in this story. One character I will say that annoyed me in this story is Tedros. I definitely found, especially in the Camelot years, he had a lack of character development, which I did not like. However, Sophie and Agatha are back again killing it, especially Agatha. Agatha and Sophie's friendship bonds are really tested, even as they're both trying to do their own different quests in this world, and especially how the world gets bigger than just the School for Good and Evil, I really liked reading about. I think it's a great book to introduce the next kind of set of plot lines to this story, so I definitely think if you enjoyed the first trilogy in the School for Good and Evil, you would enjoy the second one as well. At this point in time, I want to say that I enjoyed the first 3 books more than the last 3 books, but I honestly enjoyed both trilogies almost equally, just maybe the first 3 books a little bit more. That saying though, a lot goes on in this book. We meet a lot of new characters, and especially like the new villains in this story, you're just in for a treat. So much goes on with them, and I really enjoyed my time reading about them and how we never really know what's the truth and what could be lies, and as well as how the past and present kind of mush together and you kind of have to figure a lot of things out. And so because of that, I loved this book. I loved the ending, and I think this book is great. You should read it. I'm gonna jump into a couple spoilers now, so if you want to hear my non-spoiler thoughts for the 5th book, click the time in the screen now. In the story, the main fairy tale we see is the lion and the snake. And especially when there's a snake going around ruining all of the kingdoms, the lion comes out of nowhere and saves everyone, and we find out it's not Tedros. Tedros has been doing a horrible job at being king. Agatha has been doing a horrible job at supporting him. And so it's kind of a mess when someone else then decides to step up to the plate and kind of act as king, being Ryan, as we find out. And I love the fact that Ryan was kind of lying his way to get to the throne, and it was such a dramatic ending in the end, because I remember reading it for the first time and being like, how on earth is anything going to be resolved after this? I have no idea. I loved the ending of this book. That is really a theme in this series. I love the endings a whole lot. I think he does a great job at putting so many things into the ending, because that way, at least if it's a little bit like slower towards the middle-ish or beginning part, it all is worth it when you get to the end of the story, which I really liked. Other than that, I don't think there's much I want to say for this book, but I enjoyed it. I would recommend it, and let's move on to the 5th book. So I just had dinner and had to come back, and now I have no idea what I was talking about. And now I'm going to be talking about the 5th book, The School for Good and Evil, A Crystal of Time. This book is really interesting for my rating because last year I actually gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, but one thing I was really worried about when I read it at the time was the fact that I might have been blinded by the hype. And I think I was, because upon rereading it, I actually changed my rating to a 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely think this book was a good one, just not as like amazingly amazing as a 5 out of 5 star review. In this book, I really liked how the theme of good and evil is once again present, but it's on much more of a gray scale than it was on the original 3 books, because in the original 3 books it's very clear as to who is good and who is evil, but in these books you're kind of always questioning that as who might be the true heroes in the story, especially once you learn the morals behind everything the villains are doing. It starts to get you to question, like, are they actually the good guys? I really liked that theme in this book, and especially how kind of go from being hopeless in this book that things won't work out to then maybe getting a little bit of hope. I think that's really cool in this book. I don't really want to say too much more than that because that's gonna get really like on the verge of spoilers, so I'm just gonna cut over to the spoiler section now. If you want to hear my thoughts on the 6th book, click the part here. So I liked this book a lot because we go from having like no hope, like Agatha is on her own, all her friends are in the dungeon, we don't know what's happening, and I really liked how the author kind of is able to like flip that around a little bit. I really liked that. I'm now just gonna kind of talk about a couple scenes that stood out to me. The main thing I want to talk about in this section is the crystal itself and how Sophie and Agatha were able to see each other's past, presents, and futures, and also other people's as well. For example, Ryan and Japheth's. I really like how Sophie gets the pot stirred after she sees a crystal showing her that Ryan actually kills Japheth, and then she's about to kill Ryan. And I like how she's really driven by the fact that she's actually going to be selfless and sacrifice herself to try to get rid of this villain for her friends, and she's going to do the good thing and be the hero in the story, when in reality she actually only confirms the death of Ryan and ends up getting married to Japheth. And so I found that, you know, like, whoa, dang, that really just happened. And so I really liked that moment in this book because as evil as it was really awesome to read about. Another thing I liked in this book was Reaper, Agatha's cat. That was so funny when I read it for the first time last year. I was like, I can't believe the cat is like president of like Gnomeville or land or whatever it's called. That was hilarious and I loved it. I think the way this book ends was really good because a lot of his books end on a no hope note, especially the first book, second book, and fourth book. Only the third book had like a somewhat happy ending, and this book here also kind of left on a glimmer of hope. There's finally some motivation in Tedros, and one problem that I really had throughout the series was the lack of growth from Tedros. But at the end of this book, I was like, maybe this man has some potential. So I really did enjoy that. Other than that, I don't think there's much else I want to say. I loved Sophie and Agatha's friendship. I love how they continue to fight to be friends, no matter the costs, and I just really liked it. I'm now gonna jump onto the sixth and final book. And last but not least, I will be talking about the sixth and final book in this series, The School for Good and Evil, One True King. Now, this book is most in my memory because I actually just finished reading it, but before I jump into my non-spoiler thoughts for this book, I am going to plug my recent video that I made all about this book. I go into a lot more details, both non-spoiler and spoiler, and I am actually proud of that video, unlike a lot of the other videos I made last year. So click the link up here if you want to hear my full thoughts for this book, because it's like 30 minutes long. There are plenty of details in there that you won't really find in this video. So if you're really interested, click that video. But a brief overview I will do for this book now. This book is the sixth and final book, and I really enjoyed this book. We start off with the book with one of the characters not really acting like themselves, and I love in this book that Sophie and Agatha's friendship has survived all the way through. I think they're really at some of their strongest moments in this book. I loved it a lot. Again, something that's pretty common, especially in the Camelot years, is that Tedros, where is he? Tedros still isn't that much of a good character in terms of growth. I feel a lot of the times in the book he does something great and then goes back down with something else he does or says. So for that reason, not the hugest fan of him, but I do think he redeems himself towards the end of the book. In terms of plot for this book, I really liked it. I think the way it's structured is super exciting. One of my favorite parts was at the end of Act 1, something surprising happens, and I really liked that. It really kept me on my toes. And in this book especially, we learn a lot of backstory for things that we were kind of wondering about all along, which was really satisfying to actually finally learn the truth, because sometimes in these books, you don't know exactly what's the truth and what's a lie. So I really liked that. I don't really know what else I can say for this book that's like non-spoilers. If you really do want to hear my thoughts, I would recommend you check out that video, because I do actually spend a lot of time talking about both non-spoiler and spoiler thoughts. But I will just be going over a few quick spoilers for this book now. If there's one thing I need to mention in this book, regardless of all the real important stuff that happens, Hort and Sophie. Thank God they got together. Like, I was rooting for them since, like, really book 1, but mostly book 3 when we had that wish fish scene. I knew they were gonna end up together no matter what. I don't care if Hort had a girlfriend. I don't care if Sophie literally despised the thought of it. I knew they were gonna end up together. And somehow, some way, the book made it happen. They ended up getting together in, like, the third last page. Talk about leaving it to the last minute. But I loved it so much. They were honestly the reason I gave this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars rather than just a 4. I was rooting for them. The author really pulled through, and I was just really happy with it. Because Agatha and Tedros, we kind of know that they're going to end up together in the end, so it was nice to see that they actually got like that wedding scene at the end, which was great. But, you know, Hort and Sophie, they were just, you didn't know what was going to happen with them. And then finally they ended up getting together, and I was like, yes. I also really liked the 3 tests. I think that's really cool. But more importantly, how King Arthur didn't necessarily foresee that it was going to be Tedros and Japheth, but more or less it was going to be Tedros and Chaddock. Because Chaddock was King Arthur's technically rightful heir, but he never knew that, and he also died before he ever got to know it as well. And so the fact that all these trials were set up and for a completely different scenario, I thought was really cool. And also the fact that the schoolmaster had his revenge kind of on everyone by having 2 sons, kind of naming them after the evil schoolmaster and good schoolmaster, I really liked as well. Brings back that theme in there, that past is present and present is past. Love that a lot, and I thought it was great. This book definitely deserved a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really liked it, and I just really overall enjoyed my time reading it, and I thought it was a great conclusion to this series. Anyways, that is my complete series review for The School for Good and Evil. I know I kind of briefly went over all of my thoughts for this series, but that's because talking about 6 books is like quite a lot to do, and I also do have full reviews on all of the other books anyways, so I figured I don't need to spend too much time going over them all again. I will link those videos down below in the description if you want to check them out. I would recommend the 6th video because it's probably the least cringiest of them all because I made it this year, but I hope you enjoyed them nonetheless. Anyways, I think that's all for me for this video, so if you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and please comment down below if you've read this series, your thoughts, your favorite book, all that kind of stuff because I really liked this series. I would highly recommend it, and I genuinely just had a really good time reading it. One thing I want to say for this series is that it's a super fun, magical, great story, deals with themes of friendship and relationships, good and evil, truth and lies, often grayscale items. I think it's really cool, the whole series, and I genuinely just had a really fun time reading it. Anyways, like I said, I hope you all did enjoy this video. I loved talking about this series. It is one of my all-time favorites, hence it takes up like a third of this shelf up here. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I think that's all I have to say. This is probably going to be my last video talking about the School for Good and Evil series. So if there are any questions you have for me or anything you want me to talk about, please leave me a comment below on this video like I said, so we can have some cool discussions. Anyways, I will see you all in the next video. So until then,